Yeah, that was broken. So it's time to fix it. In this video, I'm going to show you how to rebuild and repair a Losi DB Pro or TT Pro shock, what parts I'm going to need, and the rebuild process for it. If you're new to the channel, welcome. My name is Troy and this is Roadside RC. You'll tend to find me bashing and crawling and drifting and racing, plus doing product review videos and how-tos just like this one. So I was recently out with one of literally my favorite vehicles here, which is the Losi DB Pro, and I had a crash. And it was such a good crash that not only did it break the upper shock screw where it screws in through the shock tower, it actually ripped the whole shock rod out of the shock body. So we have a couple parts. Clearly I lost the spring, so we need to put some new springs back on it. I need some E-clips to put this all back together. I hope that the piston is in there, otherwise I should have a kit with the piston in it. So I'm going to get these parts off, show you how to rebuild this shock in case you have actually broken it yourself. First up, I need to go ahead and get the rest of the screw out of here. So it is a 2mm screw in the back side here, along with just a nut on the front side. This is part of what I broke, is this is a long screw that goes through all of this into the shock and gets screwed on. So clearly I need to get another long screw to replace that. With all the screw parts out, I can tell that this screw is about a 25mm long screw, and it's multiple pieces now. It's about a 25mm, button head screw. So I'm going to just dig through my spare parts bin and find one of those. If you need this one because you broke it, you can find it in the list of parts down below in the video description, and you can purchase it straight from Losi. I was able to find just a random screw from my parts bin. So it goes screw through the shock tower, first nut. This is the spacer bushing there for the shock. Then you'll have another nut on the outside. That part's all done. Now we get to get this shock shaft off of here. Backed out this one screw, shock rod then comes out without any kind of problem. Somehow, magically, with all this damage, it actually looks perfectly fine. It doesn't look bent. It doesn't look anything at all. So it looks like, fortunately, somehow I'm going to get away with not having to replace it. But now the big question here, what's inside this and how much damage is there? As you ever work on a shock, you should really get yourself a good set of shock pliers. They're really cheap. This is an older set from Dynamite. I can provide you a link down below to lots of different options that are out there. Just go ahead and get yourself some. Proper tools is always really handy. We'll start by removing the shock cap. It may be pretty tight, so we'll see what we have in there. O-ring looks good. Oh, look, I do have a piston. I didn't know if the piston would actually be all blown apart or not. We are. So I do have the piston. That's good news. Now I'm going to have to dump out and clean out this container to see, because there should be, like, you can see clearly fluids coming out. And I'm expecting that there's going to be parts in here somewhere. I'm actually very surprised to find that I do have all the parts. The piston actually looks great, no issues with it whatsoever. The two E-clips were actually still in there and intact. I am in no way going to reuse those though, because they've completely been sprung and compromised. So those are going to go in the trash can. Make sure as you clean your shock body that you do get the two washers out of the bottom here, and so you're going to have to replace those as they come in. You should be able to use them just as they are. First step we're going to do is use our shock pliers and come in here. We're going to go ahead and remove this shock rod end. Now we can go ahead and assemble the piston up here. It is going to be E-clip, piston, and then E-clip on each side of this rod. And just like that, we have, again, E-clip on the bottom, piston, and rod. And now this whole assembly will slide in through the shock body. We'll make sure it comes out nicely. And then we're going to be looking at this big washer, O-ring going in, and then the little plastic one that packs it. Okay, and you should notice, get those sealed into this end nicely. If you want to, there's sometimes people will put like a green slime in here. That does help prevent your shock from leaking even more. I tend to not have, I don't typically worry about it. This bottom cap then goes on and should compress all that nicely together. Nice and tight. All right, at that point, your shock shaft shouldn't have any like real much side-to-side play because it's being held here and it's being held by the piston. I can feel just an ever so slight amount of back and forth movement there. But we are in very good shape now, so we can go ahead and we can put the rod back on the rod end back on the bottom here, and then we will start filling this fluid. For this next step, you're going to want somewhere to be able to set your shock for a while. I have this handy dandy stand that I use, and that works really well. It is a 35 weight shock oil that is stock in this vehicle, so I have some here. You're going to fill it all the way up, or just a little bit below the top. Then you're going to actually pump this shock back and forth a little bit, and bubbles are going to be coming out of the top here. As you do it, nice and slow, get all the bubbles out. Should feel some resistance depending on how thick your shock oil is. All right, and then you need to let this sit maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes, something like that. You'll actually see the bubbles dissipate. If you're in a hurry, hitting it with some heat will help those bubbles get out. But hey, come on, no need to rush this. Just let it sit there for a little bit and you'll see all those bubbles pop. That didn't take but just a couple of minutes, and I can see it's completely clear here. Now, a couple things you want to do, and it depends on, this is kind of going to be basher spec vehicle for me, so I don't really care. You can actually set some level of a preload. When you have a diaphragm-like system like this in your shock, you can actually set some level of preload on your shock. If you have the rod end in like this and then put that diaphragm on, it will naturally want to collapse back to someone like this height. If you had it all the way out, it would want to naturally try to come back out there. I'm going to assemble this somewhere in the middle. You take this diaphragm and you don't want to trap any air in here. And so you very carefully, trying to make sure you can see it in the camera, you very carefully come in and slide this cap in over. It's going to be okay if you get a little bit of oil out. Got just a little drop there. All right, and you can hold it and see if you actually feel any. Oh, I can actually feel that diaphragm move back and forth as I move that shock up and down. So it's got a good seal in there, no air. And now we're going to very carefully screw this shock cap back on. You want it tight enough to form that seal at the top, but not too tight that you really screw up that diaphragm. Now, you should be able, see how that pushes back out? This is you can help tune your shock by how you do that. These last few steps are pretty easy. We're gonna go ahead and put our spring back on. Go ahead and put our spring perch on. We have a working shock now. Can readjust your preload if you need to, and then we are going to install it back on the truck. There we go. Shock looks just good as new. We are back in business. I hope this was helpful for you. If you have any other questions, feel free to post them down in the comments, and I will have a list of the different parts for these shocks in the video description. Thank you, and goodbye.